Welcome, everyone. We're still letting some folks in, but we want to go ahead and get started. This is so exciting. This is day 3, our closing session of the 4th annual Joining Our Voices virtual symposium. We are so excited to dive into today's topic. We are all in this together, Caregiving in the U.S. 2025. If you missed yesterday's wonderful session on conversations that count, aligning care with goals for every patient, or Tuesdays when wishes collide with reality, navigating dementia, decision making, and disputes in care planning, no worries. We are recording all of these, and as soon as we can, they will be posted and available up on our North Carolina Serious Illness Coalition website. Let's do just a little bit of logistics. We ask that you keep your microphone muted, and for best viewing, choose the speaker view for Zoom, as we'll be spotlighting the different presenters. I'm spotlighted now, but I'm gonna take myself off in just a little bit. Do take a moment, the chat is open to introduce yourself, your organization, if you're representing one. Feel free also if you wanna share why you're joining today's call. You can use chat throughout the session. This was an intentional decision to do this as traditional Zoom as opposed to a webinar. The last few days have proved it's been really great having people have the ability to ask questions and get engaged through the chat line. And so we can see each other and we can have a great conversation. We are really thrilled you are joining us today. We know it will be thought-provoking. And quickly for me, for those who don't know, I am Heather Altman. I am the Executive Director of the North Carolina Serious Illness Coalition. We are a statewide group of health professionals and providers and caregivers, most important for today's event. And we are focused on improving the lives of the seriously ill of all ages and their caregivers. Through collective engagement of our active work groups, we address clinical practice and quality, advanced care planning, and caregiver and patient engagement through a variety of communications, advocacy, and educational events. You are all welcome to join the coalition. There is no cost. To learn more about the coalition, you can go to our website, ncsicoalition.org. Or you can drop me a note in the chat. I'll be paying attention to it, and I can add your email to the listserv. I do want to take just another moment to thank all of the coalition members for helping to develop this symposium over the past few months. But we want to also give a special shout out to our sponsors of the coalition in general and to this symposium. I'm going to switch slides. There we go. So you can see all of our wonderful sponsors. We are proud that there are no costs to join the coalition, but we do have costs. And so we are especially grateful to our sponsors for helping us put on this event, as well as others throughout the year. In addition to highlighting all of our sponsors, we do want to give special recognition to today's session sponsor. Go back to this page, CareForth. And in just a moment, I'm going to do two things at once. I'm going to highlight Kelly Tungate. She is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Partner Relations for CareForth, and we're really excited for her to be able to share some opening remarks. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing so you can see Kelly better.
Morning, everyone. Heather, thank you so much for the introduction. We are very happy and proud of our opportunity here to sponsor today's event and to be a part of this incredible coalition. So thank you, Heather, for your leadership. Thank you for 3 great days of featured speakers on absolutely critical topics. Just to give you a little bit of background about CareForth, we have been providing caregiver support services for 25 years. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. And today we serve over 14,000 Medicaid and Medicare Advantage patients or members across over 30 states. So family supports and family caregiver support is all that we do at the organization. In North Carolina, in the great state of North Carolina, we deliver a service called coordinated caregiving, and are proud to have worked with the Medicaid department in North Carolina to launch this service back in 2019. And what that service does under both the CAP C and CAP DA waivers is to support family caregivers caring for a loved one at home. We do that by providing a financial stipend to that individual and surrounding them with a group of professionals who support them on a daily basis, helping to educate, coach, and support them through whatever it is that they're working with or dealing with the family loved one that they're caring for. So again, we're proud to be sponsors. Heather has been just such a great ally for me. I want to publicly say thank you for taking me under your wing and making so many introductions. But we're proud to be here today and look forward to the event.
Kelly, thank you so much. Thank you for your personal leadership and connection. And it's been really fun being with you and for CareForth support. And as much as I adore you, it pains me to now take away your spotlight. But really, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my goodness. So with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the spotlight first for my amazing, I want to say partner in love instead of partner in crime, Karen Appert, the co-lead of the North Carolina Caregiving Collaborative and such an active member, both with the Serious Illness Coalition and for her leadership. Just her dedication to caregiving, dedication to all of us, dedication to me is just outstanding. And so I'm also going to go ahead and add spotlight to our wonderful presenters and insight thought leaders today, to Kim Cantor and Sarah Verbeest. And with that, I'm going to take my own spotlight off and turn it over to Karen Appert. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. I hate that you're taking your spotlight off, though, because I feel like you should always be spotlighted as yeah, Heather's done an amazing job as Kelly mentioned, as anyone who knows Heather, Heather's a force to be reckoned with. Heather is one of the most caring, thoughtful individuals I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So I'm excited to jump into the symposium. As Heather mentioned, I'm Karen Appert. I'm co-lead of the North Carolina Caregiving Collaborative. I'm also the co-lead of this coalition's caregiver and patient engagement work group, although a lot of that work gets done under the Caregiving Collaborative. That group is a volunteer group of organizations and individuals who are engaged in caregiver advocacy for people caring for those across the lifespan. So we are advocating for better supports for family caregivers, whether someone is caring for an older adult or a younger person with serious illness or disabilities. And most importantly to this work, I was the caregiver for 25 years for a mother who had MS and dementia. And my mom passed away in 2023. So for those who know me, know that I'm pretty passionate about this work. Because she had MS, we had a lot of serious illness issues as well as disability. And we had a lot of experience in the healthcare system as well as in the community-based systems. And my advocacy, I feel like, is a way of paying it forward to those who advocated when I couldn't, because I was too busy advocating for my loved one. So if you attended the last 2 days of symposia, as Heather mentioned, there were some really important, engaging conversations about advanced care planning and how that changes with a dementia diagnosis, and also the importance of having conversations about goals of care in serious illness. If you weren't able to attend, I highly recommend that you watch those recordings when they're available, because they're incredible discussions. And those two discussions had big components, at least I read into them, that were caregiver related. As you can imagine, those two issues are very important to people caring for their loved ones. So I'm really, really excited that we are able to have Kim Cantor from the National Alliance for Caregiving here today. The National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP released their Caregiving in the USA report just a few months ago. And for those who know, that gets released every 5 years. So we were really excited to invite her on this call so she could share some of the latest data, including some state data. That's the first time they've ever done this year. They've got state-related data on caregiving and the prevalence of caregiving. So the first part of the symposium is going to have Kim presenting on the data, and then Sarah Verbeest with the Jordan Institute for Families at the UNC School of Social Work is going to have some comments and open up some discussion with the attendees today, because we really want this to be conversational the way the last few days have been. So I'm going to introduce both of them, and then I'll ask Kim to come on and she can tell a little bit more about herself and then start her presentation. So Kim Cantor is the Chief External Affairs Officer for the National Alliance for Caregiving, where she leads the intersection of policy, advocacy, and communications to empower America's 63 million family caregivers. And Kim, I just wanted to let you know you need to change your bio on the webpage because it still says 53 million. And Kim,
Yeah, I noticed that. Thanks. I appreciate it.
I was like, wow, this is all brand new information. And then Dr. Sarah Verbeest, who is the director of the Jordan Institute for Families at the UNC School of Social Work, and she is also a clinical professor there. Sarah is a public health social worker, a researcher, an innovator, and an advocate with a dedicated interest in caregiving issues. So we're so excited to have you both on this symposium. And with that, I will ask Kim to share her screen and get her slides ready and give us the newest, latest, and greatest data on caregiving.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Can you all see the from beginning? Let's see. There we go.
Yeah.
Everyone can get thumbs up. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Karen. And you were 100% right. Things move very quickly, and there's so much new data and information that's come out in the last few months. And I'm excited to share super high level with you all today. But I wanted to say, Karen and Heather, thank you so much for inviting me to this. And I feel like I met you both just about a year ago, and I was very new to the caregiving world. And you took me under your wings and taught me a lot. I'm also somewhat new individual to North Carolina. My family moved here about 5.5 years ago, so I'm in Charlotte. So it's personal too, right, from the North Carolina perspective. So thank you guys for that. Yes, a little bit about myself. So I'm a Chief External Affairs Officer for the National Alliance for Caregiving. I've been here about 18 months, but my background is really in patient advocacy. I spent 15 years in various patient advocacy organizations, really looking through that lens of federal policy, legislation, work, and then spent 8 years in a consulting firm working on community engagement with the National Institutes of Health All of Us research program. And at the end of the day, there's like so much commonality here amongst the role of the family caregiver. Have my own personal caregiving stories with my father who has Parkinson's disease and my husband who has epilepsy. So it's all personal. And, I think being at this organization and then having this opportunity to roll out caregiving in the US has been almost all those worlds colliding. So I will stop talking there and start just diving into the data. So wanted to chat with you all today about caregiving in the US 2025. It is our unlocking data to transform family caregiving. It is really the bread and butter of what the National Alliance for Caregiving does. So a little 5 steps back about the National Alliance for Caregiving for those who may not be familiar. Our mission is that we catalyze system change to really build that health, wellness, and financial security for all family caregivers. And we do this really through research, policy, and narrative change. Those are 3 legs of our stool. And I'm not going to read our value statement, but really what it means is that we're passionate and we all have lived experience. We all bring our commitment to ensuring that family caregivers, their voices and their stories are integral to everything that is going on in the healthcare ecosystem. We do have 3 strategic impact pillars. One is around championing caregiver health and wellness. Another is around driving economic inclusion. And then the last one is around fostering caregiver-friendly communities. And all 3 of these play together in the same way that I talked about research, policy and narrative change. And so we're really sort of trying to figure out how do we continue to drive change within these strategic impact pillars. And one way we do that is all through our data, which is caregiving in the US. So I'm going to talk here just really high level around what is caregiving in the US, or CGUS, which is what you'll probably see written a lot throughout here. And I did take one step back this morning because I've been so in it that I'm like, acronyms. People don't like acronyms. Let's caregiving in the US. So a little bit about caregiving in the US. Dive in a bit to the national data. What are the key insights and trends we're seeing from that national data and that report that was released at the end of July this year? Then the state data, which is literally hot off the presses. We released it on Tuesday, so it's 2 days old. And then really what's next for caregiving in the US and the data and the research that'll come out of this work. I have to, of course, like you all did, give some big shout out to our sponsors for this work. This is a collaboration with AARP, which they are definitely huge partners in all of this work. And, we just continue to be so grateful for their support, for our sponsor support in making this work possible. It's about caregiving in the US. This really is, Karen, you set it up really nicely. It is what we call our nation's deepest dive into the day-to-day challenges confronting family caregivers. And we look at that of caregivers of older adults and people with serious illness or disabilities. This report, Caregiving in the US, this data set is really considered the authoritative data resource on family caregivers. And we are also looking across the lifespan. It's not just older adults. It's not just, so there is this wide range of look of family caregivers and those who are there caring for. As I mentioned, this project is a joint effort from the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP. And this is our 6th edition that came out in July of 2025. You can see the other years listed here. I think what's important here is when we are looking forward into the insights, and the data trends, really 2015 is the first year. So we have 3 reports, so 10 years really of data that we can look at and do comparative work with, rather than so things kind of change between. But that's, to really have that longitudinal data and that information is going to be huge from the data that we released this year. So when we talk about caregiving in the US, and we are looking at the care continuum, we are looking at sort of all the pieces of the puzzle you see laid out here. When we say parental care, when I should put a little asterisk there, we aren't looking at parents just providing routine childcare for their children, but rather it is more parental care of those who are children with disabilities, those who need that extra layer and love of support. We're looking at sandwich caregivers, caregivers supporting people with serious illnesses, people with disabilities, and of course, caring for older adults. So what we are, I feel like I missed a slide here. No, what we are measuring. So we are measuring in caregiving in the US, a wide range of issues and topics. We're looking at financial situations. What's the impact of caregiving on work? What are the levels of supports and services and information and education that caregivers are getting? Caregiving intensity. What are the types of activities that a caregiver is doing to support an individual? What's the living situation? We're also looking at their own well-being. What is the health and wellness of the caregivers, their use of technology? That's something new that came this year. And then also looking at long-range planning too. That's sort of some new components for this year. Oh my gosh, so I will step back. I don't know where this one slide went, but just to sort of share with you guys, I had a slide that talked a little bit about the methodology of the report. And so this year we were able to capture just over 6,800 survey respondents. The survey is done via phone or via online with an opt-in for telephone, done both in English and Spanish. We had also in this wanted to point out that family caregiving is how it's defined for the purposes of this survey, because that's also really important. And broadly, we're looking at family caregiving as defined as providing ongoing support and management for complex tasks for children, adults with children and adults with chronic, disabling, or serious health conditions. And then there's a series of screening questions, which I had on a slide. I must have accidentally messed up them. Apologies. But it really is getting into that question specifically, so someone can opt into how they are a caregiver, and we're looking for those over age 18. There's another layer down in terms of the questioning that gets into this year and new in the 2025 report is around paid caregiving. And we'll dive into that a little bit later. And I think we started to hear some folks talk about that in the lead-in. So, getting to the good stuff, national data, what are the trends and insights that we are seeing? Well, the prevalence of caregiving, I think that'll come of no shock to anyone on this call, is that it has grown dramatically over the last 10 years from 43 million in 2015 to 63 million in 2025. And that's just over a 45% increase in 10 years of family caregivers. We're now seeing that 1 in 4. So I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second, Karen, because I do not know what happened to my slide deck here. My goodness. You know what? I had 2 slide decks up. So let me close one. Let me go back to the other. I apologize.
That's okay.
I was like, wait, I'm missing the good stuff here. So
well,
right,
and yeah,
again.
yeah. And I mean, again, anything that, if you find that you don't have, oh, there you go. I was going to say,
I got it.
You could send us the new slide deck and we'll get it out when we send out. Okay.
I definitely, there we go. Oh my goodness. I don't know why it's not showing. This is so strange.
I will say you're giving us a chance to just like hold that 63 million number.
Yeah, that was totally intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah. And still a wow factor for me. So thank you for the time to process that, Kim.
You're welcome. You know what? I don't know what's going on, but let's just keep rolling with it. This feels like par for the course, right? The life of a family careggiver is
exactly.
Nothing ever goes as planned. So yeah, 63 million. There should be a slide in here that's 1 in 4 Americans who are family caregivers. And that's just, to your point, a staggering number when you really think about it. So what is the key insight we're seeing here? And really the big takeaway from the 2025 data is that the support systems are expanding, they're growing, they're becoming a little wiser to the needs of family caregivers. But the demands on family caregivers are growing, and they're growing fast, and it's really not keeping pace with that demand. So, kind of taking a step back at what we were measuring and looking at in the caregiving data, I'm going to kind of pull out the different components of the report. So we're going to start with looking at that demographic. So who is caregiving? And again, this is all national level data. So this is a lot of information to take in, but I'll just highlight a few. That the average caregiver age is 51. We are seeing 29% in the sandwich generations, those who are caring for both children and adults. We see women, 61%, are primarily caregivers, and 38% are men. As you start digging into the data, the male caregivers actually tends to grow as the age goes younger. So there's really, as you look in the report, it's quite long. There's so much data to dig into, but there's some really interesting trends when you start cutting the data. Another thing to point out is really this 1 in 5 family caregivers has a disability. We did a fact sheet on family caregivers who with disabilities, and when you think about caregiver health and wellness, and then how the challenges associated with that, and then caring for another, there's some really interesting facets that come out of this who is caregiving and that demographic information. So the next thing is, what in the world are these caregivers doing? And they're doing a lot, which I think everyone knows here, but we wanted to focus on and pull out caregiver intensity. that this caregiver intensity, the what they're doing and how much of it a caregiver is doing is increasing significantly. So 45%, a survey respondent said that they are in high intensity caregiving situations. And we're defining that really by the number of people you're caregiving for. What are the number of activities of daily living that you're supporting for your care recipient? A lot of it also includes where are they living with you? Are you going to them, right? There's many facets of defining this high intensity caregiving, but people are doing a lot, and I think another piece to point out here that really feeds into our organization's policy work is around this bullet at the bottom that 55% are performing medical and nursing tasks, yet only 22% receive training for these complex tasks. So it means that we're asking family caregivers to do a lot and to do a lot outside of their comfort zone. And I remember talking to people who would tell me, oh, I go to YouTube, I look up how to do that. And that's not how we want it to be, right? We want people to feel like they're being trained and that they're feeling confident in the work that they're doing. And another data point that's not on here was the follow-up is if you are receiving training, how do you feel? How confident are you feeling in your ability to perform that task? And it was 92%. That's a huge, right? So 22% or only 22% are receiving training, but when trained, 92% feel confident in what they're doing. So that says to us, we have to do better to make sure that people are getting the training they need. So, oh my goodness. Let's see. What in the world is going on? There we go. Okay. So health and well-being. It's a Thursday, right? Maybe it's a Halloween coming out here. So another piece of this puzzle is looking at caregiver health and well-being, health and wellness. So emotional stress, this is one piece we wanted to really pull out, is that emotional stress is widespread, and that 64% of family caregivers report facing moderate to high emotional stress. It's extraordinarily difficult, as many of you know, to be a family caregiver. There's so much on you and so much you're trying to manage. 1 in 5 report that their own health is fair or poor, and that they're having worse outcomes. Sorry, that their care recipient, though, and when they live with their care recipient, they experience even worse health outcomes. The physical strain is extreme as well, and then the facets around mental health, caregiver health. Mental health is looking at 1 in 4 caregivers also report feeling alone and having that isolation, and that is definitely one that I see. Again, we always like to talk about our lived experience. My mom, who's caring for my father with Parkinson's, she feels it. It's like very hard to leave him. She feels alone and she feels like she can't do it. So this one I feel acutely just on a personal level. Financial impact. This is an area which we know is extraordinarily impactful on family caregivers, that 47% are experience at least one negative financial impact due to caregiving, and that's defined around inability to pay bills. We're looking at paying credit cards, like keep paying your electrical bills, for your food as well. And so also we see here that 1 in 3 have stopped saving due to caregiving. 23% have taken on more debt. As I mentioned, the unpaid, 20% have left bills unpaid or have paid them late. And also seeing the greater impact on Black and Latino American family caregivers have the higher financial impact than others. Another area that has gotten a lot of attention, and rightly so, is around caregivers who are working. And 3 in 5 family caregivers are balancing their day-to-day jobs with their caregiving responsibilities. And this is a lot to put on individuals. This feeds back into caregiver health and well-being and all that emotional stress that folks are feeling. We know that 58% go in late, leave early, or take time off in order to provide their care. Excuse me, that there are a lot of challenges with job flexibility and job security when you're looking at caregivers who are in hourly paid jobs versus those who are in salaried or exempt versus non-exempt positions, and that there is greater financial strain on those who are not working, and they're, who've maybe had to stop working, or maybe they've had to go part-time, and sort of seeing that the data really just shows that impact, tying together the financial strain while also working, or having to reduce your hours. See. So continuing with the working while caregiving, I thought it was important to show, again, sort of this is those workplace benefits. They have expanded. We talked about supports and services that have sort of grown to try and meet the needs and demands of family caregivers. And this then feeds in as well to that those challenges or the differences you see between salaried and hourly workers around telecommuting, paid leave, paid sick leave as well. And this is, I think a great chart that just really shows the difference in that growth from 2015 to 2025, which is really, again, sort of the great beauty of the data that we have now, that we have those three different reports to show growth over time, or hopefully decreases in some places. And so I feel like I've given you a lot of very negative data, and we think it's really important to also talk about the positives of family caregiving. And there is purpose in care. I think all of us know that, who are providing care. It's not easy, but there is purpose in it. And the data show that 51% report finding a sense of purpose or meaning in caregiving. And then some other sort of positive changes that we've seen is that nearly half of family caregivers are reporting long-term planning for their future care, which is a change. The use of technology has actually it's doubled, and it's also made people's lives a little bit easier to feel like they're managing medical appointments. They can keep track of folks, their care recipients, and those who are maybe coming in and out of their home with their direct care workers, making sure people are really sort of being there and helpful, and that stress level hopefully decreases just a little bit. We know that folks are getting help, unpaid help so 53% have unpaid help. And then when I mentioned the screening around paid caregiving, that's new data that we're showing in 2025. And so within this data set, the 63 million, 11.2 million family caregivers now receive some form of payment. And that usually primarily through Medicaid, or Department of Veterans Affairs also has a paid program, family caregiver program as well. Let's see. So another key component of this is just highlighting, what do caregivers want? There was sort of this open-ended, like, what do you want? What would be helpful to you? And these are the four pieces that really popped up the most, which is 2/3 of the caregivers really support payment programs, as I just mentioned, and that seems to be a higher request and interest from those who have lower incomes. There's also 2/3 that find income tax credits valuable, and those tend to come from those who are higher earners over $50,000 a year. There's also 1 in 3 that want respite services. So this is the most common requested support for family caregivers. We don't see the uptake being that as high. So we know that we need to continue to either, one, provide education, make it easier for people to access, and then also could just continue to push for there to be funding for respite services. And then also 1 in 3 caregivers want assessment by healthcare professionals. So what that really means is, I'm here with my care recipient and I want you to ask me how I'm doing. Is there anything I can do for you to help make your life easier as you're caring for your care partner? And this is really, you'll sort of see this play out a bit as well when we start talking about the state data. So that is two more things. One is to access this report. It came out in July. There's a QR code here. It should take you to caregivingintheus.org, on which you will find everything you ever wanted to know about caregiving in the US. And I will caveat that this site's going to change actually next week, but it'll still all be at caregivingintheus.org. And then there you will also find an executive summary of the reports. The report itself is around 140 pages, which is a lot to digest. So what we've done is we created an executive summary. We have subgroup fact sheets. So there's a fact sheet on various race and ethnicity, disability, low income caregivers, working while caregiving. We have an infographic that provides really high level who are our America's caregivers. And then there's also a frequently asked questions page as well, which will really sort of dive into some more questions. If folks have questions around the methodology or how family caregivers were defined, that's really a helpful resource to go to. So then I'm going to dive into the state data. So as I mentioned, I appreciate that, Karen. So just on Tuesday, so also new to me as well, we released Caregiving in the US, Caring Across States. So this report is let me take one step back. So caregiving in the US, the survey data, I mentioned we had 6,800 plus respondents. This represents nearly a 5,000 person increase from 2020. So when presented with so much data and so much interest in people sharing and participating in the survey, we finally had data that was rich enough to be able to dig in at the state level. And I'm not a data scientist, so I can tell you nothing more other than our friends over at AARP really did all of the analysis and modeling at the state level. And there are, for 32 states, North Carolina being one of them, these deep dive analyses are reporting, I should say, of the data in the state. And that's where we had enough respondents. The other 19 states, we get like a snapshot of that state, and then it has more regionalized data. So, for example, in Maine, we have a state prevalence number with some New England regionalized data around it. But the North Carolina report will, in many ways, mirror what you see in terms of data points for the national report. Not in all cases, but in some. So, this Caring Across States report is an executive summary that provides really just sort of a lay of the land, if you will, across all 50 plus 51, including District of Columbia. What does that look like? What are we learning? What are those key messages that have come from it? In addition to all of these 51 state profiles. So it is an enormous document, but it's one place to really go to if you want to see what's going on in Colorado, what's going on in Michigan, what's going here. So that is like the great place to go for all of that work. I think I'll dig in a little bit here, but just one point to note out is that we see, the percentage of family caregivers are highest in the South. And I think you would see all of that start to play out in this data and being able to share that. So carrying across, so here's sort of those two slides that really talk about the high level findings, if you will, from the state data work. And I don't know that this shocks anyone, but really to have all the data to back it up is that place fundamentally shapes the family caregiving experience. And that is really borne out by one, family caregiving prevalence and intensity truly does vary across state. And these are just some data that were pulled out to just kind of help highlight that piece that we saw. Prevalence rates range really from 20% to 34%. And 34% is in Mississippi, and the highest prevalence rates are in Mississippi, West Virginia, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Louisiana. And then I talked about care intensity, right? So that care intensity also differs by geography. When we saw really the care intensity is the highest in Louisiana at 53%. And then the number of hours that an individual reports providing care, you can see that varies as well in terms of providing 30 hours or more a week. That you'll see Connecticut actually has the largest number of people who are spending the most amount of time providing care. And then we also know that state policies shape support for family caregivers. So I think the perfect example here is around paid caregiving. And when we talked about Medicaid plans and providing that support. So paid family caregiving rates range from 10 to 28%, in New Jersey being the highest. And these differences largely reflect the variation in those long-term supports and services and home and community-based service policies within the state. And then also that range of being able to find affordable services. I mentioned respite care, right? That is a big range as well. So also two other pieces to point out here is really that recognition of family caregivers by healthcare systems and providers differs across states as well. So I had mentioned how in the national report, 1 in 3 really just want to be asked about themselves. How are you doing? What's going on with you? We see that happening a bit in New Jersey at 38%. I feel like these all should be better and should be higher numbers. But oh, sorry, the first bullet is really around being asked about their care recipients' needs. So you as a caregiver, are you being asked about their needs? And then when it comes to your own health and wellness, the highest is only at 26% in Maryland, 7% in Kansas reported being asked about their own health and wellness. And another piece about this is really we felt like when you look across it, really this data really helps create state-specific opportunities, right? So how do you look at the caregiving landscape against either national benchmarks or your peer states? How can you learn from each other? What's going on to create these sort of sustainable care systems? What are the policies that we as a state should think about either implementing, changing, whatever it may be? So and we saw this as a way to really identify those specific areas. Like I said, financial support, is it healthcare integration? And it's going to vary by state, right? Like, what is your state sort of environment and climate like? What is, how can you use this data in order to press on various and certain issues is going to be impacted by a variety of different sort of landscape challenges, if you will, challenges or opportunities. So North Carolina, where did we land? Because that's why we all are here, right? So in North Carolina, we now have nearly 2.3 million family caregivers in our state. And that is 27% of adults in North Carolina are family caregivers. I understand Karen that this is a big increase from what was last reported. So we're happy that we have this new data for you all to go and take and use to hopefully really advance different policy issues. So again, there is this North Carolina report. It's about, I think, 7 or 8 pages long. And I just pulled out things just from the first page because there's so much rich data and information within here. But we can see in North Carolina, the average age is 49, so 2 years younger than what the national average is. 1 in 3 in 10 family caregivers live in a household with an income under $50,000. 49% live with their care recipient. 6 in 10 North Carolina family caregivers work while providing care. So these are just sort of the pieces of the puzzle that you'll find within the North Carolina report. And I'm sure we can put the chat, I can share it with you guys as well. So you can have that link to that specific report. So I have talked ad nauseum, but I have just a couple more things. Caregiving across states and the data profiles, QR code for it, caregivingintheus.org as your one-stop shop for all things related to this data and these reports. So what's next? And I have to go because I had to leave this in here that state data and profiles were released 2 days ago. So that was what was next. Next week, I mentioned caregivingintheus.org as our primary site for all things caregiving in the US. It will be replaced with a new data hub that is an interactive, I don't want to call it repository of data and information because that doesn't do it justice. It is truly like bringing these, what are PDF reports to life. And so you'll be able to get every ounce of information, interactive, charts and graphs that you can sort by like age, gender, income levels, and really just play around with the data. And of course, bringing it to life as well. We want to infuse it all with caregiver stories, podcasts. We want to make sure that we're really tying the data and the lived experience together to bring it all. So it's not just numbers and information, but it really is bringing it all to life. And then in 2026, we have a 50 plus caregiving across generations report coming out in collaboration with AARP. as well as caregiver health and wellness. So these are those deep dive analyses using this data around these two topics. And then we're doing more issue briefs, so shorter, about 5 pages around financial well-being, chronic disease caregiving, and around mental health as well. So those are three. So these are, I guess, 5 new great sort of reports and information that'll be coming out in 2026. So I think, yes, I made it all the way to the end. I felt like it's a lot of information, but I really do think, one, thank you for taking the time to listen to all this data. If you have any specific questions, kim@caregiving.org, please feel free to reach out. As I mentioned, I am not a researcher, but I can connect you with those if you have deep dive research questions. Happy to make those connections, or if you have any clarity on any of the data, I'm happy to try and answer it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'm going to let Sarah jump on, but I wanted to thank you. And I also wanted to say I did put the link to the caregiving data in the chat just because I knew people would want to get to that as soon as possible. But
Amazing. Thank you.
Sarah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what Kim presented.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank Karen and Heather for inviting me to be here. Like Kim, they have both supported me in this new journey for the Jordan Institute, and we're so grateful for their leadership and support. You know, the National Strategy to Support Family Caregivers has a section on research, and the biggest, most important part in that section is about data. You know, data still really, really matters. And so I think this is really exciting, and I'm glad we have a chance to dive into this. I think a little bit just about me. So some of the work that I've done, I have a current project, for example, that's looking at improving postpartum care for families with babies in intensive care units. So if you want to see, in my opinion, the most like stark difference in care, you have one, you know, the baby that's getting the state-of-the-art care that could be found in the entire world. And yet we're hearing from moms that many of them don't even have a comfortable chair to sit in after just having a traumatic birth. So that is some of the work that I've done. Me personally, I have provided care for my little sister when she had cancer in 2020. I just moved in with her for a couple months to a emerging adult child with significant mental health issues. And then both my beloved parents chose to fall apart at the same time in 2024. And so in Florida, so we managed to move them next door to us, and then mom had a stroke. So I am in it deep at all parts of the life course, it feels, and I think it's just so important. And I think that the data that you shared and research being foundational because it helps us see an unseen workforce. I teach students about administration and management, but I don't see discussed this 3 in 5 caregivers are at work. We don't talk about that. We might talk a tiny bit about maternity or paternity leave. We don't talk about how to support those workers. So I think there's just so many ways that this data is really important. And so while I'm talking a little bit, I would love to see some questions going in the chat for Kim about things that maybe got your attention from this presentation or that you had questions about. And while we're waiting for those great questions to come in, you know, I also wanted to highlight that it's so important that you're looking at how caregiving impacts people based on their identities, because we know in this country people don't get a fair start in life, and that, you know, we see inequity starting at birth, and we see them across the life course. And I think that what you're illustrating is so important. And at the same time, we also know that those families are incredibly creative and resilient and have been providing excellent care for their families over time. So with the stories, I think it allows us to identify their strategies that I think could be widely applicable. And my last comment just went out of my head, but luckily there is a question in the chat. So what data do you think that we still need? And was there something missed or something that you weren't able to collect that you would really like to, Kim?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. There's so much in there, quite frankly. It's a good question, and I wish I had an answer for you.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I have heard a lot about really young caregivers. So I noticed that you have a report coming for 50 and over caregivers, which is really great. But I'm wondering, um, what do the data look like for young caregivers? It's something I don't think about until I had a student in my class at the tender age of 23 who was always late because she was caring for her grandmother who was medically fragile. Any word on our young adults that are caregivers?
Yeah, so we definitely, that is one of the secondary reports we want to do is on youth caregivers and looking at youth as 30 and under. So certainly from like a high level, as I mentioned, we saw that younger caregivers tended to have more equity between male and female, or more of an even split, if you will, between male and female. But to your point around being students, being late, just from a story perspective, I feel like we definitely get those stories a lot. I feel like we've talked to a lot of individuals who didn't necessarily even recognize that what they were doing was caregiving because they were just kind of in it and doing it. And I think that's the beauty of the work that we're trying to do is pair like the data, the story, and then what is the policy change that needs to occur in order to support the individual. So that is like a long-winded way of saying, yes, we definitely intend to want to do like a secondary analysis on youth caregivers. Um, Another thing you mentioned about like the unseen workforce, that's definitely like a piece that we lead into as well. And I'm happy to put in a plug for my AARP colleagues. They have a great data point in their report valuing the invaluable, where it's 600, I want to say billion, but I may be wrong, $1 million, we'll call it 600 something million billion, I'll look it up, of unpaid labor in the work that family caregivers are doing. And they are issuing that report, so revising it for the new data and information to come out. I believe it's in early next year. So I'm gonna guess that that number will go up significantly.
Yes, and Tara underscores that as a great point, and that many people might be part-time caregivers or not even see themselves as caregivers, and which is why I think it's helpful that you mentioned and defined caregivers a little bit as well. And sometimes I also think it's an identity that some of us need to lean into a little bit. This is not what I thought. I thought my sister was going to do this. So it has taken me a hot minute to sort of like absorb that as a new identity that I wear as well. So I think there's some complexity around that. And Heather says it's 600 billion with the B.
Billion.
A lot of money.
Thank you.
So another question, how can we dig into data about the 4 million people, if I got that number right, who report caring for a child under 18 with an illness or disability?
Kim, that's from me. You knew I was going to ask that question.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Karen.
Yeah.
Did I get it right?
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and I appreciate that, Heather, to putting in the billion, because when I was saying my hat, I'm like, it's billion, but I was like, that feels like a lot of money. So thank you for that, because it is a lot of money and it is a lot of labor that is going unseen and unrecognized. So Karen, to your question around the individuals who are caring for children under the age of 18 with an illness or disability, it's a similar question to your question to the comment around youth caregivers. It is an opportunity that exists there with the data. We need to find, quite frankly, some funding to be able to help really dig in. I can come at it from the anecdotal side of it, which is in our advocacy work, during the Medicaid cuts, with HR1 and that debate and those pushes. We did a ton of Medicaid story collection, and the very well organized individuals who were able to connect us with many states across the US who had parents who were caring for individuals with disabilities. And those parents were, in many ways, being paid for, rightly so, because they were unable to work, to care for their children. Others who were terrified about work requirements because maybe they weren't getting paid, but they were, they wanted to stay at home. They needed to stay. I wouldn't say want. They needed to stay at home with their child because they're the ones providing care. I remember a story from a woman in Georgia who was a teacher, and her employer let her bring her son with her to school, which is like crazy to me to think like, yes, wonderful, but like you should be able to be at school and be a teacher and be able to get the supports and services you need to sort of be in both places. So there's a lot of, I think, stories to be told within only the data, not only the data, but again, sort of that story, that policy, and the narrative change aspect of that community, if you will, of caregivers.
And I just want to say before Sarah gets back in, because I'm going to let Sarah keep going. Just for those on this call who are part of our North Carolina Caregiving Collaborative, you know that we have quite a few people in our group that are parents of children with serious illness or disability. And we are reminded pretty much every time we get onto our monthly calls that their voices often aren't as I would say heard as loudly because they're seen as parents. And one of our really strong advocates calls herself a medical mom, and I think that's a really interesting way to describe the kind of work they're doing, and it separates them, but we just want to make sure that they're seen as caregivers in addition to being parents. So sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
So I see the questions in the chat, but I want to just kind of build off of one thing that you said, Kim, which is being mindful of some of the potential major policy shifts that we're seeing in our country right now, and thinking about what might be the impact on lessening of access to food benefits like SNAP, and of course Medicaid changes when providers don't get paid the same amount when there's not as many supports. I think I would predict that that is going to have a toll on families and caregivers who are going to need to be adding that to what it can often be a delicate balance. So I guess my thought would be do you have any thoughts about monitoring kind of that situation given our geopolitical context? And I'm not being political, but I think it is, we're all seeing it and living it. And I am curious, do you all have any strategies for how to document what is happening? Not having access to special education, that is so critical for the families that Karen mentioned, for example.
Yeah, so it is a very good question. And we are working on it in terms of a state strategy. Candidly, part of our challenge is, we're an organization that kind of sits really at the national level, and we don't have a huge state infrastructure. That is Karen and Heather, right? We have our partners in different networks. So we are working on that at the national level. I can tell you that we're working to so I can talk specifically about work requirements. So in work requirement space, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services will be issuing guidance sometime in the spring next year around to states on how to implement some of these changes within Medicaid. And so one will be around definitions of caregiver, definitions of work, what does work requirements mean? And so in the bill that was passed, there was actually some language around defining caregivers per the RAISE coalition, the RAISE Act. So you talked about the national strategies to support family caregivers. So that's positive actually for caregivers, that there is some more accepted definition of family caregivers that's beyond sort of bigger than just I am doing this or I'm doing that. It is really more that life stages, that all-encompassing definition of family caregivers. So we are trying to reach out and work with HHS to have that conversation about the RAISE definition of family caregivers, and how could that be worked into the guidance that is offered to states as the states then move to implement. So that's one just example of the national level. In terms of the state level strategy, we would love stories, really, is like what you're seeing. How is this impact? Because that then helps from an advocacy perspective to be able to go to those elected officials and say, hey, in your state, we're seeing X, Y, and Z. Um, and another thing that we are hoping to do is to follow about 5 family caregivers through their journey and the evolution of the Medicaid program. And see what, really be that person who's there sitting in the background, right? Like documenting what's happening and being able to help show that story over like an 18-month period of time.
Awesome. Well, as a researcher, I really love stories more than data. So I'm really glad that you all did the data work with numbers for me, and that you're including stories, because I think that's so important. And I believe Kay Castillo is on here in North Carolina, and she's a great social work and advocate, and also has taught me about the importance of story when we're trying to move hearts and minds of our elected officials at all levels, including at our local level. So I have a great question from one of my new colleagues at social work, from Jenna. She said, maybe there isn't data for this yet, but I'm wondering if you saw any differences in strategies that different caregiver groups use to cope with, manage the tolls of caregiving on their well-being.
Yeah, so this wasn't in the data. This isn't a part of the caregiving in the US data, but it's such an interesting question. And I wish I had an answer for you. I do not.
I think it's a really interesting question too. And some of the questions I have that I don't think are in your data, but having the data that you have is an amazing jumping off point, trampoline, one could say, for us to continue to dive into some of these other questions. I really love that you have data around what's positive about caregiving. I know our Dean Denby Brinson at the School of Social Work, as the Jordan Institute was moving into the space, she was excited about that because, when we love and care for each other, that's part of our humanity, and can just bring such joy. And so I think it's so important that we also follow that narrative. But I also have personal curiosity about kind of what are the factors that bring families together around caregiving. We've all seen those stories, and then the ones where we've all seen families just completely explode as caregivers. And so what, over time, what are resilience factors, and what are things that we can do to support around risk factors for that? So lots of questions that we can all ask together. So
I would
good.
sorry, one second. I would also offer apologies. You had mentioned in the national strategy around one of the goals, this is around data. So we actually lead in collaboration with a couple of researchers, the Care Network, which is that goal 5 around data and research. And I think the question is, there is sort of that setup around like what is a research agenda around family caregiving. And I've sat in a couple of those phone calls, and I definitely am now remembering conversations around like how do you measure what type of programming is most supportive, most useful, most needed, and how do you then how do you make that sort of work for which community and in what setting, right? So that work is definitely being done. It's just not reflected here in the caregiving in the US. But it's definitely an area where people are interested in learning.
Well, and I love your connection to that group, because research only matters if it goes into practice.
Yeah.
And so hopefully as that group is able to start to explore some of these questions, and you can help the rest of us know what people are learning. So I think that's really, really cool. So given the data and your advocacy efforts, do you have a sense of what caregiver support policy efforts are more likely to be adopted than others?
So more likely it's gonna vary across states, quite frankly. It just depends. Programs are structured so differently, and at the national level, which is mostly what I can really speak to, it is we've sort of shifted from the national strategy implementation, right? How do you take this blueprint for action that straddles across 15 different federal agencies with something like 500 different actions that can support family caregivers to really defending? The positioning has changed from proactive to more defensive modes and in protecting what's currently there. So, all of that to say is like our work really has focused. One, it was on Medicaid at the beginning of the year. Now it is really about the Older Americans Act and reauthorization of those programs that work to support family caregivers like respite care, National Family Caregiver Support Program, funding for these programs. We also, I mentioned caregiver training services in the data, talking about training for family caregivers. That has been a big tenet of our work around Medicare, and caregiver training services as a reimbursable activity under the Medicare program. So we've been successful at getting that to be an activity that can be reimbursed. Now it's about the uptake, right? Like making sure that providers and health systems, one, are aware that it's there, and then two, are using it. And then, some tweaks around the edges of that too is what types of providers are allowed to bill to that as well. So we see it all as like opportunity to just continue to sort of educate the ecosystem that like there are needs out there, there are ways to help plug those needs, right? And so like just being aware of them, I think is really quite honestly half the battle. I will say as well, we have a cancer caregiving collaborative, and their work has really focused on um, looking at I won't call them unique, but we'll call it unique experiences of cancer caregivers, and really focused on one, that integration of family caregivers into care teams, and then two, the financial impact of cancer caregiving. And in the integration into health teams, that's where there's really been a big push around these caregiver training services. And there's a report, I will find it, that we released. I think it was in July as well. July, it's been a big, busy year. I think it was in early July where we did sort of some early learnings, if you will, from these caregiver training service codes in Medicare, and case studies of two health systems who've tried to implement, and they're in various stages, like very early on. Again, it's a lot of internal education that like actually this helps us with our health outcomes, and it's worth it to us to invest the time and effort into build, and it's not a huge amount. So it's like from a system perspective, they're like, is it worth our time and effort? And it's really them educating that it is, right? And this is where it's like all the pieces of the system don't talk to each other. And so it was an interesting report, and those case studies in particular to see here kind of like what's worked for one system and what's worked for another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me think a little bit about, well, it's like one step away from research, then we'll come back, but thinking about also our community colleges as really great places where you can get some training. So thinking of what other groups in our ecosystem are already there. My son is a certified nurse's aide, and they get training on some of the key things that he trained me to do so I could take care of my mom. And so I often wonder, where are our creative partnerships in this space, or also low cost training programs that can help? Just to speak to that point, which I thought was so impressive about over half of caregivers doing tasks that and only 22% of them being trained, which is pretty incredible. And I think that one is very solvable. I think that is very solvable. I also was curious about mental health. So and well-being overall, because that's certainly something that I see both from the caregiver perspective as well as the person that's needing care. It's complicated. It can be complicated when relationships shift a little bit. It can be complicated for caregivers. You're dealing with a lot. And I'm kind of curious, does your data look at anything around mental health? And then ability to access mental health services?
Yes, so that is a great question. So it does look at mental health. So when you talk about caregiver health and wellness, there are specific questions around mental health of the family caregiver. So we are working on a little deeper dive issue briefs. They're not a full secondary analysis that'll come out next year around mental health. We've also been in conversations with NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, because they had the National Alliance for Caregiving. We had done a collaborative report with them maybe almost 10 years ago now. And so it's time. We have new data, we have new information. There is definitely the momentum around mental health is very different now than it was 10 years ago. So it's been a really interesting conversation because they have family caregiving sort of tenants within their organization, but they're not pulled together. And so when they saw the 2025 data, they reached out and we've been having these conversations. So all of that to say is that partnership would probably, so we can provide the data and the family caregiving perspective, and they can provide where the services and supports are. Since we don't provide direct services or supports as an organization, that partnership kind of bridges that gap of the data and information and potential policy recommendations, but where do I go, right? I'm a caregiver who needs help. Where do I go? So I love that partnership because it sort of brings a bigger picture, if you will, to it all. So we also had this conversation around not only the mental health of family caregivers, but caregivers caring for those with mental health conditions, right? And so that is the next piece of the puzzle as well. When we talk about, I mentioned we're doing a chronic disease diseases and conditions caregiver, that's a brief as well, right? So that'll look at the care recipient. So within the data, what are the most common, believe we report out on the top 20 diseases and conditions that individuals are have from the report from the data, right? And so digging into that, like what is that experience within these certain level number of disease areas. And I'm only stumbling a little bit because we were just talking about this morning, trying to kind of figure out like you can't really do all 20. How do you sort of slice this puzzle, if you will? Because you could go deep on each one, right? Like there's so much information out there. But sort of that would be almost like the stage setter, if you will. And then you could really kind of dig into the specific disease areas. So we have talked about caring for those with mental health in a collaboration with NAMI. I know also in the young cancer space, our Cancer Caregiving Collaborative intends to do a secondary analysis around cancer caregivers with the 2025 data.
That's awesome. And something else that I also read that you won't have in your report, but I hope it will emerge from research is also when scientists are coming up with treatments or approaches that, there's this thought of, how does that also work for the caregiver? And I think that's a really such an important area. So often we think about what does this do for the patient, but like broadening that to think about, well, is the caregiver going to be able to support this kind of treatment? What does this kind of treatment do to those that are caring for them? So there's so much to unpack in that space. And I really appreciate that you mentioned caring for people with severe and persistent mental illness. It's so expensive and difficult to find support services. I think we often talk about services for folks as they age and not saving, but oh my goodness, you try to put someone that needs more intensive care, it's $30,000-$40,000 a month at a minimum for not even full inpatient care. So there's just thinking about what that does to those families, I think is something else would be really nice to see elevated at some point as you continue to differentiate in terms of, who is caregiving for whom and with what condition. So I'm looking at time, but there's other thing I wanted to unpack a little bit, which I thought was really interesting that you shared, which is that quite a large percentage of folks have been able to find unpaid support in their networks to help them. And does your report kind of dig into that a little bit? Is that getting into, I don't know, juicy conversations around what does mutual aid or peer support look like? Because I think, how do we build ecosystems of support? And I'm curious, can you say more about that data?
Yeah, so that was actually I think that's a super interesting point too. And it's one of those data points that didn't have a follow-on question. So I think back to the top, like what additional data and information we're starting to catalog, like what is it that kind of came out that was interesting, but no follow-on question was asked. So that is one of them. That for sure we wanted to be like, wait, we should have asked more about that. But I think you're right. I think it really is like, how do you what does that ecosystem of support look like? And it's so different for everyone and where they live. And, I think that drives into the state data, like place drives your family caregiving experience. And do you live in a state that or an area that's gonna sort of provide you with that care infrastructure, if you will, in order to make those connections with people who are gonna sort of be able to help you. So it is definitely a follow-on question. And if people have other things and data and information they want, I'm happy to bring it back to the research team in terms of like what could be asked in the 2030 report for sure.
I
I
just put in the chat. Sorry, I wanted to shout out to our friends at the Center for Volunteer Caregiving, because they're leading a consortium in North Carolina of groups around the state that have volunteer caregiving services. And yeah, I think these are all really important things. And there are a lot of people in the state doing work around it. And that's one of the things our group wants to really raise these people up more.
yeah.
Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, I think that's great. I just copied the link for myself for that. And I think it kind of gets back to also when we think about some of the other things troubling our society around isolation and loneliness and disconnectedness, which I sometimes think are kind of a part of the root of our unbinding that's happening. And I have often thought if my parents weren't living next door to me, I'm not going to lie, we did have a space. There was room. We had room for this in our lives a little bit, not as much as I thought, but definitely had some room. And I love this idea of, again, what are ways that we can authentically be able to be in community with each other around caregiving as a joy and a service is so important. I know I'd love to see if anyone else has anything you'd like Kim to ask. Otherwise, I think you should hang out with the Center for Volunteer Caregiving on that one. I am curious just to know what those supports look like and who they are, because I think that would be kind of like a basic understanding and like how much time are those folks helping with that caregiving space, I think would be really interesting.
And I think you would find that a lot of them are, it varies just like everything at the state level or at the national level. It's going to vary by your area, it's going to vary by the county you're in, it's going to vary by the support they have and the funding they have. So yes, Heather and I have just started getting on some of those consortium calls, and they're very interesting. But I think you're right. I think sometimes I go back to that the future of caregiving looks like it's going to be you create your community as much as you possibly can and figure it out, which is what a lot of caregivers do. We just would like to see more support in other areas if possible.
I think it's a both and. In my opinion, I think some of this is generative in the times in which we are, and it doesn't replace larger structural supports of good benefits and services and resources. I think that for us to all thrive, we need both of those.
I also think telling the story of when those programs and that structure benefited you is like really important. And I share an example I had worked with in Wisconsin, the greater area, Wisconsin Area Agency on Aging, and they had shared with me like 10 letters that they had received from people who'd received, one woman received $1,000 grant that was what she needed in order to bring her husband home from he had a traumatic brain injury from a fall. And she was like, our life was turned upside down. All of a sudden, I, became a caregiver to him. He had a feeding tube, like everything, that you can. And she was so grateful that she had somewhere to turn to. It was $1,000, which in the grand scheme of things was a lot of money to her, but not a lot to the system. And it made their lives better. And like when I read this lovely letter, I was like, this is perfect, right? This perfectly illustrates why these programs are valuable. And then I would say the other piece of telling that story, getting those like positive stories about the impact they made on people's lives, and then sharing them is important.
Yeah.
I want to just mention that Tara Mueller from Disability Rights North Carolina actually posted, speaking of stories, that they collected some stories about the importance of Medicaid to people with disabilities, and they're incredible. So she put a link in the chat. We have a lot of great links that are included in the chat, and we also have we will be happy to share some links that we put together, not just from what Kim has presented, but some other links to groups doing amazing work in North Carolina around family caregiving. I also, because we're getting close to the end, I also want to shout out somebody that I don't know if she's still on the call, but Trish Farnham, who is working now with the North Carolina Center on the Workforce for Health. Trish got us involved. I see she is on. Sorry, Trish, you don't have to say anything. But we have so many great partners that we work with that are doing amazing work in different aspects of this space. And we do, we focus mainly on the family and what they call informal caregivers, which we know they're not really informal, but Trish and her group and the group that works in that space is doing a lot around the paid caregiving workforce. And they're doing amazing work in promoting we need that paid workforce to help those family caregivers that are looking for respite. We need the paid workforce, and it goes beyond, it's at the hospital level, it's at the home level, it's in the long-term care facility level. So I did want to just mention them, and I'll put a link to that. But Trish got us involved last year in a lot of the Medicaid advocacy around Medicaid, and I just have to say that I can't say enough about the things that they're doing and the knowledge they have. And we have some other partners. I saw Sandra Phelps from the North Carolina Coalition on Aging on the call, and that they're another group that we connected with to form the Caregiving Collaborative. It was the Coalition on Aging, the Serious Illness Coalition, and a group called the Children's Complex Care Coalition of North Carolina. And that was where we said, we want to look across the lifespan, because we're hearing these stories of support needed for parents of children with serious illness or disabilities. And it sounds a lot like those of us who are in the aging field and looking at, the caregiving for someone that's an older adult, but the funding sources are different. The advocacy looks different. The support is different. So we keep working toward what can we do to support those caregivers regardless of who they're caring for. I did want to mention real quickly, and I don't think our partners from 4CNC, Children's Complex Care Coalition, are on, but I got on this morning to get a link, because they do a lot sort of behind the scenes. And on their webpage, it mentioned that children with complex health needs, with medical and social conditions such as chronic conditions like lung disease and other conditions, require medical and non-medical services. This is what got me. With an estimated 340,000 Medicaid-insured children with complex health needs in North Carolina, it is essential to accelerate efforts to improve systems of care for these patients. That number really got me. So I'm excited to re-engage with them as we move forward with this other data we have now, talking about the bigger picture in North Carolina and nationally on family caregiving. So sorry, that I wanted to mention a few of those things before I forgot. And then I will also mention that I'm going to put some information in the chat on the North Carolina Caregiving Collaborative when our meetings are, and some links. But I would love if anyone else has any questions or comments, and then any last things we want to wrap up here as we get close to the end.
I just wanted to thank Kim and your amazing organization for continuing to center data, because data matters. It really does. And that the way that you're pairing with stories and your just the national lens you bring and giving us an opportunity to look across states. I just want to say thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. And I also want to say that we have tremendous human capital in our state, amazing colleagues. And I'm glad that we all had a chance to see this data together and think about how we can move it forward for change.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you, Karen and Sarah and Heather for the conversation. I think the challenge with the data is there's so much of it and there's so many different ways you can go. And I guess that's a good problem to have, right? One thing too, Karen, you mentioned about Medicaid and with the coalition you were speaking of in Caregiving in the US 2025, the larger report, there is a breakdown of insurance. And so there's 8 million individuals on Medicaid within the 63 million number. I don't know enough to know, I admit it, in the North Carolina report, if there is specific around that. But if there are things that are missing that you feel like in the North Carolina report, send it to me and I'll see what our friends over at AARP can dig up for us.
That is a really good idea. I think you're right. I think the amazing thing is I went back through the report again. I have sticky notes on the things that really stood out to me. You can go through it time and time again, and it depends on either what's going on in your life or what you've read about recently, and different things stand out. And I do think National Alliance for Caregiving did an amazing job, not just with the report, but if you dig into the research questions, I'm a skeptical caregiver. I often look at data and I go, is that really, how much did they dig in? What were the questions they asked? How did they ask those questions? The survey is really impressive.
It's all there.
I
Yeah.
mean, the questions they asked were legit. I do think about, we're talking about people who are, some of the things that really got me was your percentages of people doing high intensity caregiving. I mean, that's who we want to be talking to, right? The other thing that got me about those kinds of questions is when you start digging into ADLs and IADLs. And I think about it, like people on this call most likely all know who those are or what those are, right? Activities of daily living and instrumental activities of daily living. But until you get into the healthcare system or like start studying it, those are not things that people talk about when you're in the healthcare system with your loved one. You don't have a doctor say, "Hey, how much are you helping your loved one with toileting, showering, bathing and dressing?" And I've always thought, wouldn't it be great if a medical professional sat down with you one of the first times you were in caregiving, where they recognize you're a high intensity caregiver or caring for someone with needs like that, and said, check this list out. We have lists of ADLs and IADLs. Take these home, start going through them and seeing where you are, and then next time we meet, let's talk about it, because there are things you can get help with. People don't talk that way. And what you find is when you're looking at the IADLs, a lot of caregivers are saying, okay, so I help with finances and I help with grocery shopping and things like that. I'm not doing that much work. Then you start looking at the ADLs, and I've always said that what it should be is once you start realizing you're actually doing like 2 or 3 ADLs, you go, oh, wait a minute, maybe I really do. I'm in it and I need more help. So that just
Yeah.
and that goes back to the assessments you talked about. We do not get assessed. We don't get asked most of the time, how are we doing? Are we doing okay? And I think about those Medicare billing codes, because that's something I really want to dig in as a group. I think we can do something with that, because I agree. A lot of providers don't even know that they exist or don't want to deal with them. But I go back to, you have to have an assessment. You have to know that the caregiver needs help. So you got to start with the assessment. And until we're doing that on a regular basis, I think it's going to be really hard to move the needle much farther forward. But anyway, just my thoughts. But I really, really appreciate, I see Heather on. I think that's the bell saying we got to wrap it up here. So
I use my power of the spotlight button. I do want to, before I thank our speakers, I do want to call attention. Thank you so much to Katalia Alexander, our wonderful graduate intern. Speaking of research and data, she did post, take just 2 minutes, go ahead and click on it so that way you can add some evaluation feedback. It's the same one for each of the last 3 days. Just fill out a different form if you were on yesterday or the day before, but fill out for today. I wanted to add my thank you to my partner, Karen, but especially to Sarah Verbeest. It's amazing to have such a local research partner and advocacy and research to practice partner at UNC Jordan Institute for Families. And Kim, you just gave us a cornucopia, a Thanksgiving basket, a Halloween basket of candy of data. We were so excited not just to have the national data, but Karen and I were like, do you think they'll let us have the North Carolina data? And then we know you were going to give it to us anyway, but then it got released on the 28th. But that just made it extra special and such a perfect timing for this event. So thank you to all of our panel. Special thank you to CareForth and our other wonderful sponsors. So that's my thank you. Karen, would you like to have the last word?
Oh, I'll let Sarah have Sarah and Kim have the last word, but I just want to say thank you to both of you. Kim, your presentation was amazing. I mean, you hit the highlights and really got us thinking about not only what's out there now and how much things have changed, which that made me want to pull back up the 2020 report and really look at like where things have gotten a lot more intense. And then thank you to Sarah also for your really amazing comments and questions and engaging Kim in discussion. And thank you to Heather, of course, for letting us host this symposium. Sarah and Kim, I'll give you the last word.
I mean, thank you guys. I mean, I just showed up and I'm happy to share all this information. I'm so grateful. It's useful. And, you know, I'm with you guys. Like, you can pick out anything you want from here and really just sort of run with it. And there's so many challenges, but there's so much opportunity. I'm a big positive thinker. So like, what are the opportunities that we can take this data and information and learn from it and figure out how to make things better for family caregivers? And I'm a big North Carolina advocate too. So, I'll be on your side.
I just say, go forth and care, people. Go forth and care.
There you go. Love it.
Perfect.